"You don't own anything here, sweetheart. We built 35 condos fair and square." That's what she told me, right before federal agents started taping off her precious development and water began swallowing every last unit she sold. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The first thing I remember is the sound. Not screaming, not sirens, but water. A deep, relentless roar rolling down the hillside like something ancient had finally been let loose. I stood on the reinforced concrete lip of the spillway, hands resting calmly on cold steel railing, watching as thousands of gallons surged past me in controlled fury. Down below, chaos. 35 pristine condo units, fresh paint, manicured lawns, overpriced patio furniture, were being swallowed inch by inch. The neat little roads between them had turned into churning channels. White SUVs floated crookedly against curbs. Patio umbrellas snapped loose and spun away like broken windmills. And right in the middle of it all, she stood there, Vivian Kisla, HOA president. Perfect hair, even now, though the rest of her had started to come undone. Her heels were sinking into mud that hadn't existed 10 minutes ago. Her phone pressed to her ear as she shouted at someone who clearly couldn't fix what was happening. I could see it in her face, the exact moment reality broke through that polished, entitled confidence. The moment she realized this wasn't a malfunction, it wasn't an accident, and it definitely wasn't something she could find her way out of. Behind her, flashing lights cut through the rising mist. County sheriffs, state officials, and 2 black federal SUVs that had arrived just minutes earlier. Men in windbreakers were already stringing yellow tape along the upper access road, their eyes scanning everything with the kind of quiet authority that doesn't ask for permission. One of them glanced up toward me, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. That was all the confirmation I needed. Everything was unfolding exactly the way it was supposed to. Vivian spotted me then. Of course she did. Her head snapped upward, eyes locking onto my silhouette above the spillway. Even from that distance, I could see the fury, raw, unfiltered, mixed with something new, something she'd never had to feel before. Fear. She tried to climb the slope toward me, slipping once, her designer. Shoes useless against soaked earth. But one of the officers stepped in front of her, holding up a hand. I couldn't hear what he said, but I saw her reaction. Shock, then anger, then disbelief. The kind that comes when someone who's always been in control suddenly isn't. The water kept rising. Not violently, no explosions, no dramatic collapse, but steadily, methodically like a clock ticking down. Each inch swallowed another piece of her empire. Each second erased millions of dollars built on something she never bothered to verify. Ownership. I exhaled slowly, the scent of wet pine and churned earth drifting up from below, mixing with the clean, metallic tang of rushing water. It should have felt chaotic, overwhelming, but it didn't. It felt quiet, final, like a chapter closing exactly where it was always meant to. Because none of this was rushed. None of this was revenge in the heat of the moment. Every step had been measured, documented, prepared. The permits, the inspections, the legal filings, the federal jurisdiction over this dam and its spillway, older than her entire development, older than her HOA, older than every single contract she thought gave her power. She never checked any of it. She just built, sold, smiled, and now she was standing in the middle of it, watching it disappear. I shifted my weight slightly, boots firm against the concrete, as another surge of water rolled through the channel. Somewhere below, a window shattered under pressure. Not dramatic, just a sharp crack swallowed instantly by the roar. Vivian screamed something up at me, words lost in the distance, but I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. She'd already said everything that mattered 3 months ago, standing on the same land, telling me I didn't belong here. Funny how quickly that changes when the truth comes rushing back. 3 months earlier, that same hillside smelled like sun-warmed pine and dry gravel. Quiet, untouched, exactly the way my grandfather left it. I remember stepping out of my truck just after dawn, boots crunching lightly as I walked toward where the old cabin used to sit. The air had that clean, high-country stillness, the kind that makes you slow down without even thinking about it. For a few seconds, everything felt exactly right. Then I saw the rooftops. At first, it didn't register, just a flash of uniform beige through the trees where there shouldn't have been anything at all. I took a few more steps forward, then a few more, until the entire slope opened up in front of me. 35 condos. Not cabins. Not temporary structures. Full-scale, multi-unit developments. Fresh stucco, black metal railings, glass balconies catching the morning light like nothing was wrong. A paved access road cut straight through what used to be my grandfather's lower clearing. Landscaping crews were already planting decorative shrubs where we used to stack firewood. I just stood there, silent, letting the reality settle in piece by piece. They hadn't just trespassed, they had erased something. I walked down the slope slowly, taking in details the way I always do. Survey stakes still half buried along the edges, construction equipment parked near a retaining wall, a temporary sales office set up near the entrance. There were banners, Ridgeview Luxury Living, as if branding it made it legitimate. And then I saw her. Vivian Kessler stepped out of that sales office like she'd been waiting for me. Perfect posture, sunglasses perched just right, clipboard in hand like she was running a board meeting instead of standing on land she didn't own. "Can I help you?" she asked, voice smooth practiced. I didn't answer right away. Just looked past her at the condos, then back at her. "Yeah," I said finally. "You can explain why you built 35 units on my property." She didn't flinch. Not even hesitation. Just a slow smile, like she'd heard that line before and already knew how it ended. "This land was classified as abandoned," she said, tapping her clipboard. "Our legal team verified everything. Development was approved through the county, fully compliant." I let that sit for a second, then reached in my jacket and pulled out a folded copy of the original deed. Creased, worn, but still as valid as the day it was signed. "Funny," I said, holding it out just enough for her to see, "because I've been paying taxes on it every year." That's when her tone shifted, just slightly. Not fear, not yet, but irritation, like I'd complicated something that was supposed to be simple. She didn't take the paper, didn't even look closely. "Anyone can print documents," she replied. "What matters is what's recorded and recognized. And right now, this development is lawful." I watched her carefully then, not her words, but the confidence behind them. It wasn't built on facts, it was built on assumption, on the idea that no one would challenge her, that whoever owned this land either didn't care or didn't have the means to fight back. "You sold any of these yet?" I asked. That caught her off guard, not because of the question, but because of how calm it sounded. "Pre-sales are strong," she said, lifting her chin slightly. "We've already secured commitments on most of the units." There it was. Not just construction, transactions. Money already moving. Families already signing papers for something she didn't actually own. I nodded slowly, folding the deed back up. "That's a problem," I said. She laughed, short, dismissive. "No," she said, stepping a little closer, lowering her voice just enough to make it personal. "You're the problem. Showing up here with stories about ownership, trying to disrupt a legitimate project that doesn't end well for people like you." People like you. I'd heard that tone before, years ago, in rooms where decisions got made without ever stepping foot on the land they affected. I didn't react, didn't argue, just let her finish. "If you have concerns," she added, straightening back up, "you can take them to court. But until then, this is private development property." She turned slightly, gesturing toward the condos behind her like they were proof of something permanent. That was the moment I understood exactly what I was dealing with. Not a mistake, not a misunderstanding. A calculated move, built on speed, on paperwork shortcuts, on the assumption that no one would push back hard enough to matter. I glanced past her one more time, taking in the slope, the grading, the way they'd positioned everything directly below the spillway path, and something clicked into place. Quiet, precise. I didn't say another word. Just turned, walked back up toward my truck, gravel crunching under each step. Behind me, I could feel her watching, confident, certain she'd just dismissed another nuisance. She had no idea she'd just handed me everything I needed. By the end of that week, Vivian didn't just move forward with construction, she accelerated it. I started noticing the difference almost immediately. Crews that used to clock out by 5 were now running floodlights past sunset. Concrete trucks rolled in before sunrise, engines idling like a low, constant growl across the valley. It wasn't just progress, it was urgency. And then came the online posts. At first, it was subtle. A polished Facebook page for Ridgeview Luxury. Living popped up overnight, professional photos, drone footage, captions talking about revitalizing underutilized land and bringing value to the community. Buried in the comments, though, that's where it started. Someone mentioned a man claiming ownership, framed as a nuisance, an obstacle to progress. Then more comments appeared, accounts that looked real enough, but all said the same thing. Probably a scammer, trying to shake down developers. You see this all the time. I didn't respond. I just watched. 2 days later, the narrative spread. Local community groups picked it up, posts warning residents about false property claims disrupting economic growth. My name wasn't mentioned, but it didn't need to be. Anyone paying attention knew exactly who they were talking about. And Vivian? She leaned into it. I saw her in a short video clip, standing near the entrance sign, smiling into a camera like she was giving a corporate update. We're committed to transparency, she said, voice smooth as ever. Unfortunately, there are individuals who try to exploit situations like this. But we've done everything by the book. Everything by the book. I replayed that line 3 times. Not because I doubted myself, but because I wanted to understand how far she was willing to go with it. Turns out pretty far. A county inspector showed up at the property line the following week. Mid-morning, clipboard, badge, the whole routine. He walked the perimeter, took notes, snapped photos, then made his way over to where I was standing. We received a complaint, he said, not unkindly. Allegations of unauthorized interference with an active development site. I almost smiled. From who? I asked, even though I already knew. He hesitated just long enough to confirm it. Filed through proper channels, he replied carefully. I still have to follow up. I nodded, then handed him copies of my tax records. Every year, paid in full, time-stamped and verified. The original deed. Survey maps going back decades. He flipped through them slowly, his expression shifting from routine to complicated. You might want to get legal counsel involved, he said quietly, lowering his voice. This is bigger than a standard dispute. I didn't argue, didn't push, just thanked him and let him do his job. By the time he left, I could already feel the pressure tightening. Not from him, but from the system Vivian was using. Layers of paperwork, public perception, procedural delays, all designed to box someone in without ever touching them directly. And it worked on most people. That was the part she counted on. A few days later, I stopped by the sales office again. Not confrontational, not aggressive, just present. Vivian spotted me immediately. Of course she did. She always did. This time, though, her smile was different, sharper, more confident. Like she'd already won something. Back again, she asked, setting down her pen. I figured you'd either disappear or hire a lawyer by now. I leaned lightly against the doorframe, casual. Just checking progress, I said. Looks like you're moving fast. We don't hesitate, she replied. That's how successful developments work. I nodded slowly, glancing at the updated sales board behind her. Almost every unit marked as reserved or sold. You ever worry? I asked, that moving this fast might overlook something? She let out a small laugh, shaking her head. Only people who don't understand real estate worry about that. There was again that same blind certainty. Not based on verification, just momentum, reputation, control. Well, I said, straightening up, I hope it works out for you. She studied me for a second, like she was trying to figure out why I wasn't pushing harder. Then she shrugged, already dismissing it. It already has, she said. As I walked back out, I could feel it, her confidence solidifying behind me. She thought the narrative had buried me, thought the system had done its job, thought I'd been isolated, discredited, reduced to background noise. And that was exactly what I needed her to believe. The next 2 weeks were when Vivian crossed the line from aggressive to reckless. Not in public. That polished image stayed intact, but behind the scenes, the cracks started showing. It began with the grading crews. I noticed they had expanded the lower excavation zone, cutting deeper into the natural slope, pushing earth farther back toward the spillway's runoff path. At first glance, it looked like standard drainage optimization, but the angles were wrong. Too sharp, too direct. They weren't diverting water, they were ignoring it. I stood at the ridge one morning, watching as a foreman directed a bulldozer to flatten what used to be a natural buffer zone, dense soil that had absorbed runoff for decades. Now it was gone, stripped down to compacted dirt and decorative stone that looked good in brochures, but wouldn't hold under pressure. That alone would have been enough to raise questions. But then, I saw the permits, or more accurately, what was missing from them. I made a quiet visit to the county records office. Same clerk, same dusty shelves, and requested the development filings tied to Ridgeview. Site plans, environmental assessments, water flow studies. The usual stack. What I got back was incomplete. No updated hydrology report. No federal review tied to upstream water control. And most importantly, no acknowledgement of the spillway jurisdiction that ran directly above their entire build. I flipped through the pages twice, slow and deliberate. Then a third time. Same result. They hadn't just overlooked it, they had omitted it entirely. That's not a mistake. That's a decision. And decisions like that don't happen unless someone is trying to keep something buried. Later that afternoon, I got my answer. I parked just outside the development and watched as a black SUV rolled in, different from the usual contractor vehicles. Out stepped a man in a tailored suit, followed closely by Vivian. No clipboard this time. No performance. Just quiet, controlled conversation as they walked toward the sales office. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught enough. "We closed the remaining units this quarter," the man said. "After that, exposure doesn't matter." Vivian nodded, arms crossed. "Then we move everything under the holding group," she replied. "By the time anyone questions the paperwork, the assets are already transferred." Exposure. Assets. Transfer. That wasn't development talk. That was financial insulation. Shielding liability. Moving money before consequences could catch up. I stayed where I was, phone recording, Zoom steady. Because now it wasn't just about land anymore. It was about intent. About knowing exactly what risk they were creating and pushing forward anyway because the payout came first. 2 days later, she made it official. A closed-door final compliance review was announced. Internal, HOA-led, no external inspectors invited. That alone told me everything. They weren't validating anything. They were certifying their own narrative before the last sales closed. I walked in anyway. No invitation. Just calm, quiet presence. The room went still for half a second when I stepped through the door. Contractors, board members, a couple of investors sitting stiffly at the table. Vivian didn't miss a beat. "This is a private meeting," she said sharply. I didn't argue, didn't raise my voice, just pulled a folded document from my jacket and placed it on the table. "You might want to read that before you sign anything," I said. It was a certified notice, formal acknowledgement of my ownership, backed by recorded deed, tax history, and jurisdictional mapping tied directly to the spillway above their site. Not a threat, not a lawsuit, just truth. Vivian glanced at it, briefly, then pushed it aside with 2 fingers like it was something unpleasant she didn't want to touch. "We've already cleared all legal hurdles," she said, louder now, making sure everyone in the room heard it. "This individual is attempting to disrupt a fully compliant development for personal gain." There was again the narrative, but this time it wasn't just for me. It was for them, the investors, the buyers, the people who needed to believe everything was secure. Because if they didn't, the entire structure collapsed before she could extract what she needed from it. One of the investors hesitated, eyes flicking between me and the document. "Should we at least?" he started. Vivian cut him off instantly. "No," she said, firm, controlled. "We proceed." Then she looked straight at me, steady, unblinking. "If you think you have a case," she added, voice low enough only I could hear, "you'll bring it to court. Until then, you're irrelevant." That was the moment. Not loud, Not dramatic, but final. She had just acknowledged the risk, seen the evidence, and chosen to ignore it anyway. Not because she believed she was right, but because stopping now would expose everything she'd already done. The grading, the missing reports, the pre-sales built on land she'd known. It wasn't ignorance anymore. It was willful, calculated, and completely documented. I picked up my copy of the notice, folded it back into my jacket, and gave a small nod. Understood, I said. Then I turned and walked out, leaving the room exactly as I found it. Except now, every person inside was sitting on a decision they didn't fully understand. And Vivian? She smiled as I left, confident, untouchable, completely blind to the fact that she'd just sealed her own outcome. That night, I stopped treating this like a property dispute and started treating it like what it actually was, a financial operation hiding behind construction permits. I drove 2 hours into Helena and sat down in an office that didn't advertise itself. No flashy signage, no walk-ins, just a discreet brass plate and a receptionist who didn't ask unnecessary questions. Her name was Elaine Porter. Late 60s, sharp eyes, the kind of attorney who doesn't waste time on small talk because she's already 3 steps ahead of you. I laid everything out: deed, tax records, survey overlays, photos of the site grading, copies of the incomplete filings. She didn't interrupt once. Just flipped through each page, slow, deliberate, like she was building something in her head. When I finished, she leaned back slightly, fingers steepled. "This isn't just trespass," she said. "This is layered." I didn't respond, just waited. "They're selling units they don't legally control," she continued. "That's fraud. But the way they're structuring it," she tapped one of the documents. "That's where it gets interesting." She pulled up a corporate registry on her screen, fast, practiced, and started tracing names. Ridgeview Development Group, then a holding company, then another. Each layer thinner, less transparent. "These entities are being cycled," she said. "Assets move in, liabilities stay behind." I stepped closer, watching as she clicked through filings. Same addresses, different company names, directors rotating in and out like a shell game. "They're planning to collapse this," she added quietly. "Once the last units close, they transfer ownership, dissolve the development arm, and leave everyone else holding the problem." I exhaled slowly, including the buyers, especially the buyers. Then she pulled up something that changed the entire scope. Financial disclosures tied to HOA accounts, public summaries, but enough to see patterns. Large infrastructure improvement fees collected from early buyers. 6 figures, then 7. Routed through HOA-controlled accounts before being transferred out under vague classifications. Consulting, environmental compliance, administrative overhead. None of it matched the actual work being done on site. "They're skimming," Elaine said flatly. "And they're using the HOA as a pass-through." I felt that settle in, heavy, precise. Not just unethical. Federal-level exposure. Wide transfers. Misrepresentation. Interstate transactions tied to real estate sales. "That's wire fraud," I said. She nodded once. "And potentially money laundering, depending on where those funds land." She printed a series of documents, sliding them across the desk. "You don't confront this directly," she said. "You let them finish. Every unit they sell strengthens the case. Every dollar they move compounds the charge." It echoed what I'd already started to understand, but hearing it laid out like that, structured, undeniable, it locked everything into place. "What about the spillway?" I asked. She glanced at me, then back at the maps. "That's your leverage," she said. "Federal jurisdiction. Water control. If they built, without acknowledging it, and you can prove they knew, it's not just negligence. It's willful violation." She paused, then added, "But timing matters. You don't act until it hurts the most." Over the next few weeks, I built the case quietly. No more visits to the sales office. No more conversations. Just observation and documentation. I logged every delivery, every crew expansion, every change in grading. I recorded conversations when I could, contractors complaining about rush timelines, subcontractors mentioning unpaid invoices despite fully funded claims. Then I started tracking the money. Public filings, lien notices, corporate registrations across state lines. patterns began to emerge. Funds moving out of state within days of closing transactions, routed through consulting firms that existed only on paper. I handed everything to Elaine, piece by piece. Each time, she added another layer, connecting dots I hadn't even seen yet. "They're not just building illegally," she said during one meeting. "They're extracting capital as fast as possible before the structure collapses." Meanwhile, Vivian doubled down. New promotional campaigns, limited time offers, final units available. Urgency everywhere. She wasn't slowing down, she was sprinting, because somewhere along the way, she realized the clock was ticking. And instead of fixing it, she chose to outrun it. That was her mistake, because the faster she moved, the more she exposed. By the time the last units were marked as sold, we had it all. Paper trails, transaction records, jurisdictional violations, recorded statements. Not assumptions, not theories, evidence. The kind that doesn't argue, it concludes. And through all of it, I stayed exactly what she believed I was. Quiet, disconnected, irrelevant. Because the moment she stopped seeing me as a threat was the moment this stopped being a fight and became an outcome. The final week moved fast, too fast for anyone paying attention, but exactly the pace Vivian needed. Closing banners came down one by one, replaced with sold-out signs that looked like victory but felt like a countdown. I watched from the ridge as moving trucks started appearing. Families unloading furniture, kids running across walkways that hadn't fully settled yet, neighbors introducing themselves over fresh paint and staged landscaping. It all looked complete, finished, permanent. That illusion was her last layer of protection. Because once people move in, once money changes hands and lives settle into place, undoing anything becomes exponentially harder. And that was her play. Lock it in, then disappear behind paperwork. That morning I drove down for the first time in weeks. Not to argue, not to observe, just to be present one last time. The sales office had been converted into a temporary HOA command center. Files stacked neatly, laptops open, a few board members moving with that anxious energy that comes when something big is about to finalize. Vivian stood at the center of it all, reviewing documents with a pen in hand, her posture as composed as ever. She looked up the moment I stepped inside. Of course she did. Her eyes narrowed slightly, then relaxed into that same practice smile. "I was wondering if you'd show up again," she said, setting the pen down. "Perfect timing, actually. We're finalizing occupancy approvals today." I glanced at the paperwork on the table. Signatures lined up, official seals stamped across pages that carried more weight than most people realized. "That's a big step," I said evenly. "It is," she replied. "Which means this is your last chance to stop wasting everyone's time." A few of the board members shifted in their seats, watching quietly. They didn't speak, but they were listening. I stepped closer to the table, resting my hands lightly on the edge. "Calm, steady. You're about to sign off on full occupancy," I said. "On land you don't legally control, under a structure that's already exposed to federal jurisdiction." Her expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes tightened. Not fear, just irritation. "We've been through this," she said, voice firm. "Everything here is compliant. Approved. Verified." I nodded once, slowly. Then I looked directly at her. "Are you absolutely sure you want to move forward with this?" The room went quiet. Not dramatic, not tense, just still. The kind of silence where everyone feels something shift, even if they can't name it yet. Vivian let out a short, sharp laugh. "Oh, I'm sure," she said. "More sure than I've ever been about anything involving you." She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice just enough to make it personal again. "Let me make this clear," she continued. "You've had every opportunity to bring whatever imaginary claim you think you have into a courtroom. You didn't. Instead, you've lingered around here, making vague threats, try to intimidate people who actually know what they're doing." She straightened, picking up the pen again. "This project is done," she added. "These homes are sold. These families are moving in. And you—" a small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "You're irrelevant." I didn't react, didn't interrupt, just let her finish. Because this wasn't about convincing her anymore. It was about confirming what she was choosing to do, with full awareness of the risk. Once you sign that, I said quietly, nodding toward the documents, there's no stepping back. She rolled her eyes, openly this time. There's nothing to step back from, she replied. Then, without another word, she signed. Smooth, confident. Belmano. One by one, the other signatures followed, board members adding their names beneath hers, trusting the structure she had built, never realizing what they were tying themselves to. I watched it all, memorizing the moment, not because it was dramatic, but because it was final. Every warning ignored, every opportunity to pause dismissed, every decision made in full view of the consequences she refused to acknowledge. When the last document was signed, Vivian set the pen down with a soft click and looked back at me, that same controlled smile returning. You're done here, she said. I held her gaze for a second longer, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. No, irreplaceably. You are. Then I turned and walked out, leaving behind a room full of people who believed they had just secured something permanent, and a woman who had just removed her last possible defense. The moment came quietly. No dramatic countdown, no shouted warnings, just the low, mechanical hum of steel gates unlocking upstream. I stood exactly where I had in the beginning, boots planted on the spillway platform, one hand resting against the control panel that governed everything below. Federal regulated, inspected, documented. Every lever, every release mechanism tied to protocols that existed long before Ridgeview was even an idea on paper. I didn't rush it. Timing mattered. Water levels have been rising steadily over the past 48 hours. Snowmelt upstream. Late-season runoff feeding into the reservoir exactly the way the system was designed to handle. Exactly the way I knew it would. I made the call first. One short, direct line to Elaine. It's time, I said. Her response was immediate. We're in position. That was all I needed. I initiated the release sequence. Nothing reckless. Nothing illegal. Just the controlled opening of the spillway gates within federally approved parameters. The system responded instantly, a deep, resonant shift as pressure redirected, water surging through channels that hadn't seen this volume in years. Down below, it started subtly, a widening stream along the lowest drainage path. Then another. Within minutes, the flow found exactly what it had been waiting for. The slope they had stripped bare, the buffer they had erased, the path they had unknowingly carved straight into the heart of their own development. It didn't explode, it advanced. Steady, relentless. I watched as the first condo at the edge of the grading line took it, water pooling against its foundation, then slipping under thresholds that had never been designed for this. Doors opened. People stepped out, confused at first, then alarmed. The second building followed, then the third. The geometry of the entire layout worked against them. Every structure positioned directly in the runoff corridor they had ignored. That's when the sirens started. Not local panic, coordinated response. County units arrived first, blocking the access road. Then state vehicles. And finally, the black SUVs. Federal. They moved with purpose, no hesitation, no confusion. Agents stepped out, already carrying folders, already issuing directives. They weren't reacting, they were executing. I saw Vivian before she saw me. She came out of one of the central units, phone in hand, shouting orders that no longer mattered. Her movements were sharp, frantic, but still controlled enough to believe she could fix it. That illusion lasted about 10 seconds. Then one of the agents approached her, badge visible, tone calm but absolute. I couldn't hear every word from where I stood, but I saw the shift. Her posture changed, shoulders tightening, chin lifting, defensive. She tried to speak, fast, assertive, but the agent didn't engage with it. He simply handed her something. Documentation. Official. Final. She took it, barely glancing at first, then looked again. Slower. Her expression didn't collapse all at once, it unraveled. Piece by piece. Confusion first. Then recognition. Then something deeper. Something that doesn't show up until there's nowhere left to redirect it. Consequence. She turned, instinctively, looking for control, for someone to override this, to push back. That's what her eyes found me. Up on the spillway. Still. Watching. Not angry. Not triumphant. Just present. The distance between us felt different now. Not physical, positional. For the first time since she stepped onto this land, she understood exactly where she stood and where I did. She tried to move toward the slope, heels slipping slightly in the wet ground, but another agent intercepted her, firm, professional. No raised voices. No teatrics. Just authority that didn't need to. Prove itself. I saw her mouth form something, maybe my name, maybe an accusation, but it didn't carry. It didn't matter. Because everything she had dismissed, every document she ignored, every warning she laughed off, was now standing in front of her in a form she couldn't spin, couldn't delay, couldn't bury under paperwork or public perception. Behind her, the development continued to take on water. Not violently, not catastrophically, but completely. Foundations compromised. Electrical systems shutting down. Insurance lines lighting up across networks she thought she controlled. And layered over all of it, the financial trail. The transfers. The shell entities. The funds that had already moved, now traced back in full. This wasn't just a structural failure. It was exposure. Total. Absolute. I rested both hands on the railing, looking down one last time as the scene below settled into something irreversible. Vivian stood frozen now, document still in her hand, the last of that polished certainty gone from her face. In its place, understanding. Not of what was happening, she could see that, but of what it meant. Because for the first time, she wasn't ahead of it. She wasn't controlling it. She was inside it. And there was no version of this where she walked away untouched. The shift from chaos to control was immediate and absolute. Within minutes of the initial containment, the entire development was no longer a neighborhood. It was a secured federal investigation site. Yellow tape stretched across every entrance, not the kind used for traffic control or routine inspection, but the kind that signals something far more permanent. Agents moved with quiet efficiency, sectioning off structures, marking evidence points, documenting everything down to the smallest detail. Residents who had just finished unpacking were now being escorted out, confused, frustrated, some still holding keys that had just become meaningless. I watched as Vivian tried one last time to regain footing. She stepped toward one of the agents, voice raised now, sharper, desperate beneath the authority she was trying to project. "This is a civil matter," she insisted, gesturing toward the buildings, the water, the people being redirected. "You can't just—" The agent didn't let her finish. "Calm. Controlled. Ma'am," he said, "this is no longer civil." He gestured toward the document still in her hand. "You're being formally notified of a federal investigation involving wire fraud, financial misrepresentation, and unlawful development under restricted jurisdiction." The words landed differently this time. Not something she could deflect, not something she could reinterpret. Official language has a weight to it, and she felt all of it at once. Another agent stepped forward, holding a second set of documents, thicker, more detailed. "Assets tied to Ridgeview Development Group and associated entities are being frozen effective immediately," he added. "All financial accounts under review. All transactions flagged." That's when it hit her. Not the land, not the water, the money. Her eyes flicked toward the sales office. Instinctively, like she could still reach something there, still control it. But two agents were already inside, cataloging files, removing hard drives, sealing boxes. Everything she had built, every layer she thought protected her, was being dismantled in real time. "You don't understand," she said, voice tightening, stepping back slightly. "Those funds are allocated. There are contracts, there are records," the agent corrected, not raising his voice. "And they've already been reviewed." He nodded toward one of the SUVs, where another official was speaking into a radio. "We have transaction trails across multiple states. Shell entities, misrepresented assets tied to pre-sale agreements. This isn't a misunderstanding. It was precise, clinical, final." Around her, the board members who had signed alongside her just hours earlier were being approached one by one, asked to provide identification, informed of their involvement, their signatures now part of federal record they couldn't distance themselves from. One of them, an older man who had barely spoken during the meeting, looked like he might collapse. Another tried to argue, voice shaking, insisting they had relied on Vivian's assurances. It didn't matter. Reliance doesn't erase liability. Vivian stood in the center of it all, the last illusion of control slipping away with every passing second. "I want my attorney," she said finally, voice lower now, stripped of its earlier edge. "You'll have that opportunity," the agent replied. Then he paused, just long enough for it to register. "But right now, you need to come with us." He reached for his cuffs, not aggressively, not dramatically, just as part of the process. And that was the moment everything collapsed completely. Not when the water came, not when the agents arrived, but when the reality of it, legal, irreversible, became physical, tangible, inescapable. She didn't fight. Not really. Just stood there, stunned, as the cuffs closed around her wrists, quiet, final. The same hands that had signed off on every decision, now bound by consequences she could no longer negotiate. Around her, cameras had started to appear. Local media catching wind of something bigger than a routine dispute. Lenses focused. Questions shouted. Is it true the development was built illegally? What about the missing funds? How many buyers are affected? She didn't answer. Couldn't. For the first time since she stepped onto that land, she had nothing to say. As they guided her toward the vehicle, she glanced up just once. Toward the ridge. Toward me. And in that single look, everything was there. Not anger. Not defiance. Just the quiet, crushing realization that the person she had dismissed, the one she called irrelevant, had been the only variable she never accounted for. The door of the SUV closed with a solid, unmistakable sound. Not loud, not dramatic, just final. And with that, everything she built, every lie, every shortcut, every dollar moved through systems she thought she controlled, was no longer hers. It belonged to the record now, and the record doesn't forget. The water receded the same way it arrived, steady, controlled, deliberate. Within 48 hours, the spillway levels normalized, the flow redirected back into channels that had been designed decades ago to handle exactly this kind of pressure. What remained below wasn't devastation. It was exposure. The land, stripped of its illusion, revealed what it had always been. A slope never meant to carry weight like that. A foundation never meant to exist in the first place. Crews returned, but not the ones Vivian hired. These were environmental teams, federal inspectors, structural engineers, tasked with documenting damage, not hiding it. Every inch of the site was cataloged, mapped, assessed. Not for blame, but for resolution. I stayed out of their way, watching from a distance most days, stepping in only when jurisdiction or documentation required it. Elaine handled the legal side with the same precision she'd shown from the beginning, coordinating with federal agencies, ensuring that every affected buyer was accounted for, every claim properly filed. And that was the part that mattered most, because beneath all the headlines, all the charges, all the financial unraveling, there were people. Families who had trusted what they were sold, who had believed they were stepping into something permanent. The system didn't ignore them. It couldn't. Federal restitution protocols kicked in quickly. Escrow accounts frozen before transfers completed. Insurance carriers pulled into coordinated response. Emergency housing provisions arranged through state programs. It wasn't perfect, but it was structured, intentional, designed to protect the people who had been misled, not the ones who orchestrated it. Over the next month, the entire development was dismantled, not violently, not rushed, but methodically. Unsafe structures removed, materials salvaged where possible, the land gradually returning to something closer to its original state. I walked it one morning just after sunrise, boots pressing into soil that was still soft but settling. The air carried that familiar scent again, pine, earth, clean water moving where it was supposed to move. It felt right, not like victory, not like revenge, just restored. Elaine joined me later that day, standing beside me at the edge of the cleared slope. "They're finalizing the last of the charges," she said. "Wire fraud, conspiracy, financial laundering, it's not going to be quick." I nodded. "It doesn't need to be." She glanced out over the land, then back at me. You could have pushed for damages, she added. Taken everything tied to that development. I shook my head slightly. That wouldn't fix what they broke. And it wouldn't sit right. Not with how this started, not with what this land meant long before any of this happened. Instead, I did something simpler and harder. I worked with the county to place the entire property under a protected land use agreement, one that recognized its environmental significance, its water flow jurisdiction, and its history. No future development without full federal review. No shortcuts. No assumptions. Just clarity. Permanent. A portion of it, where the old cabin once stood, I rebuilt. Not larger. Not modernized beyond recognition. Just honest. Wood, stone, a structure that belonged to the land instead of trying to dominate it. Nearby, I set aside a section for controlled public access. Day use only, clearly marked, with guidelines that respected the water system and the terrain. Nothing commercial. Nothing exploitable. Just space for people to exist without someone trying to turn it into a profit model. The first time I saw a couple sitting near the water's edge, quiet, fishing lines cast into the slow current, no signs, no sales pitch, no pressure, it settled something I hadn't realized was still tense. This wasn't about taking something back. It was about making sure it stayed what it was meant to be. The headlines faded eventually. The investigations moved into courtrooms, filings, timelines that stretched far beyond public attention. Vivian's name came up less and less. Not because what she did mattered less, but because the system handling it didn't need attention to do its job. That's the difference between power and authority. One demands to be seen. The other just works. Some evenings, I still stand by the spillway, watching the water move the way it's supposed to, steady and predictable, guided by structures that were built to last longer than any one person's ambition. There's a kind of peace in that. Not silence, but balance. And every time I look down that slope, clear, untouched, exactly the way it should be, I'm reminded of something simple. Ownership isn't just about holding land. It's about understanding it, respecting it, and knowing when to stand your ground so it can't be taken from anyone else again. There is something deeply revealing about the way power behaves when it believes no one is watching. In this story, the most striking element was not the construction, not even the financial deception, but the quiet assumption that land, law, and people could all be bent through confidence alone. Vivian did not simply build where she should not have. She built on the belief that speed, appearance, and noise would outweigh truth. And for a while it worked. That is what makes situations like this so dangerous. Not the obvious wrongdoing, but the illusion of legitimacy that surrounds it. What ultimately prevailed here was not force, not anger, but patience, documentation, and an unshakable understanding of what was rightfully owned. A home, or land passed down through generations, is not just a physical space. It carries memory, responsibility, and boundaries that cannot be rewritten by convenience or ambition. When those boundaries are respected, communities thrive. When they are ignored, even the most polished structures can collapse under the weight of their own shortcuts. So here's something to think about. If you found yourself in Garrett's position, watching someone build over your land and dismiss your rights, would you have confronted them immediately, or would you have waited, gathered proof, and let the truth reveal itself at the perfect moment? I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.